With AEW Saraya Bevis no longer in the company, it seems that fans are going to have to wait just a little bit longer before we get that long-awaited rematch between the former Paige and the former Sasha Banks. But this is yet another example of backstage drama that only happens backstage instead of happening on All Elite television. But is that necessarily a good thing, or a bad thing, or any kind of thing? Well, that is the topic of this episode, because today... Okay, first I do want to point out that yes, Saraya has mentioned that there is no real life heat between her and Sasha Banks. I was just using it as an example. And while we're at it, there are going to be a lot of things I'm going to bring up as a quick for instance. That doesn't mean you need to get bogged down in the details. Don't get caught up in the minutia. Try to understand the spirit of what I'm saying here. Okay, anyway, moving on. Now that Vince McMahon has been gone from WWE for quite some time, we can step back and really take a look at some of his more infamous practices. And one of them is his tendency to take real-life heat and put it in the ring for everybody's amusement. Now, there are some out there who think that this is a great idea and this is how you really promote and book wrestling. But there are others out there who may not be so keen to it, and one of which might just be All Elite. Now, some of you may not have realized this, but it can be kind of interesting when you stop to look back on it, as there have been a fair few heated pairings that have been avoided in All Elite, as we never got to see Colt Cabana squaring off against CM Punk on Dynamite, Mercedes Moné confronting Sammy Guevara locking horns with Andrade after their backstage incident. I mean, Tony Khan even created a brand new show just to keep CM Punk away from Kenny Omega and the Bucks. And there will be those who say that this is a simple case of Tony Khan leaving money on the table just for saying that beef is not what's for dinner. Patreon shoutouts to the Big Beef Dakari Garmin, Miami Heat Mr. J, Ron the Barber Beefcake Hawthorne, the Mangy Stray in Heat, and the Harlem Heat Harry Flynn, as well as a big thank you to all my other awesome sauce Patreon supporters. All of you make this happen, so thank all of you so very much. Now, to be clear, there are a whole variety of reasons why certain feuds may not happen. I'm not trying to claim that I know exactly what Tony Khan is thinking. However, it is pretty interesting how a lot of these major feuds never found their way onto television. But while we're looking back at history, let's also point out that this isn't purely a Vince McMahon strategy, as a lot of bookers have capitalized on real-life friction. Real-life wrestlers having real-life beef and trying to hash it out in the ring has been going on for a really long time. And in WWE, this was normally seen as a goldmine, believing that the real-life heat would translate real well on camera, and that the fans who were in the know would appreciate seeing actual drama unfold before their eyes. And to be clear, this wasn't exclusive to just Vince McMahon, as plenty of other bookers such as Paul Heyman and Eric Bischoff were known to see dollar signs whenever a real rivalry took shape. Alright, with all the times that this has happened, perhaps Tony Khan is in the wrong for not capitalizing on this. However, at the same time, just because some people have done it sometimes, doesn't mean that they do it all the time. Now, no matter how you feel about this practice, just take the time to think, what if some of these major feuds never happened on TV? What if we never saw Matt Hardy versus Edge after the whole Lita unpleasantness? Would Edge still have received the massive push that he got? Or how about the whole Hogan Macho drama in WCW? Not to mention how much WWE has managed to milk all of the animosity between Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. Like it or not, a lot of these were major pivot points in professional wrestling history, and without them, the course of professional wrestling would look very different. Maybe better, maybe worse, but nevertheless, very different. Although at the same time, this still raises the question, is it morally acceptable? Even if these feuds have had big impacts in wrestling, and even if it could generate a lot of money, that does not mean it's still the ethical choice. And it seems that even the promoters we already talked about know that too, at least to an extent, as there have been multiple examples of real-life heat never happening in the ring. Hogan versus Austin, John Morrison versus Batista, Bruno versus Flair. Just because it can happen doesn't mean that it necessarily should. Although, however, there are cases such as Matt Hardy and Edge, Booker T and Batista, where the pairs were forced to work together professionally in the ring, despite not liking each other in real life. And as a result, the two ended up working out their differences. Imagine that, therapy through kayfabe. Now look, I am perfectly aware that some of the feuds I just mentioned didn't happen on TV in a big way simply because of, well, a variety of reasons, and some of these beefs did get squashed for numerous other reasons too. There's a lot of nuance behind all these real rivalries, but again, just try to remember the spirit of what I'm trying to say here. And also, there's some times where real life heat happens backstage, but it's not between two guys that are all that marketable. And with that, try to imagine yourself in the mind of the head booker. What would you do in some of these examples? Would you put them together in the ring, or would you keep them as far apart as possible? Let me know down in the comments, and please make sure you're subscribed to the Thinking Fans channel, and make sure that you leave a like for this video. And as always, Dave knows.